There is a machine shed outside Nickerson, Kansas, in Reno County, where the paint has never mattered because there never was any paint. The metal underneath is galvanized steel, zinc-plated, dull, silver gray, the same finish it left the factory with in 1923. Dust storms took the paint off everything else on this farm a long time ago. They never had anything to take off this one. The tractor pulling the wagon beside it wears a coat of primer. The combine wears the same skin it was born in. That skin is why every farmer in 3 counties could look across a stubble field and know, without reading a single word, whose machine that was. The company that built it has changed its name 4 times since. The metal has not changed at all.
3 brothers grew up on a wheat farm near Nickerson, Kansas. Curtis, George, and Ernest Baldwin, sons of a family that had run a custom harvesting crew across the Central Plains, chasing the ripening wheat north from Texas into the Dakotas, the way custom cutters still do today. Curtis was the oldest, born in 1888 in a sod house out in the western Kansas wheat country, and by most accounts, he was the one with the mechanical instinct. In 1923, working with the family's harvesting know-how and the mechanical skills of Clarence Stevens, the Baldwins introduced something the wheat belt had not seen before, a combine that did not need to be towed. Reaping, threshing, and separating, all mounted on a single self-propelled chassis at a moment when nearly every combine in America was still a pull-type machine, dragged behind a team of horses or a tractor.
They needed a name. Curtis Baldwin had been struck by a painting, Jean-Francois Millet's 1857 canvas, The Gleaners, showing 3 peasant women bent low over a French field, gathering up the grain left behind after the main harvest had passed through. Gleaning, the old practice of collecting what the first pass missed, of leaving nothing behind. It was, the brothers thought, exactly what their machine did better than anything else on the market. They called it the Gleaner. Here is the detail that made Gleaner different from every other name in this business. Alice Chalmers had Persian orange. International Harvester had its red. John Deere had its green. Gleaner had no color at all, and that absence became its color. The brothers sheathed the machine in galvanized, zinc-plated sheet metal and left it unpainted on purpose. Western Kansas and Oklahoma dust storms, they reasoned, would peel paint off in a season or 2 anyway, so why pay for paint that wouldn't last? The bare zinc gave the machine a flat, silver-gray shine, and that accidental color became one of the most recognizable identities in American agriculture. Gleaner silver, though no one ever mixed a can of it. A farmer standing in a wheat field in 1935 could see a distant glint of that dull silver moving along a fence line and know exactly whose harvester it was, the same way his neighbor 3 sections over knew an orange tractor meant Alice Chalmers.
The early years were not smooth. The company built its first machines in Nickerson and soon moved manufacturing to Independence, Missouri in the mid-1920s. Curtis Baldwin left the firm not long after, drifting between other combine ventures before eventually building his own short-lived Curtis combine, produced for a single year, 1930, and rare enough today that collectors treat surviving examples like relics. The company he'd helped found, without him, went into receivership in 1931, when the Depression gutted farm income across the plains, and it reorganized as the Gleaner Harvester Corporation. It came back. By 1929, before the Depression hit, Gleaner had introduced the industry's first corn head for a combine, and through the 1930s and the war years, the Independence, Missouri plant kept building, adding war materiel work during the Second World War the way most agricultural manufacturers did. What happened next was the decision that would define Gleaner for the next 30 years, and it came from a company that had never built a combine in its life. In 1955, Alice Chalmers, the tractor giant out of Milwaukee, the company painting its own machines that unmistakable Persian orange, bought the Gleaner Harvester Corporation outright. Production stayed in Independence, Missouri. The silver stayed silver. Alice didn't dare touch it. What Alice Chalmers brought was engineering depth, dealer reach, and 3 decades of steady model development. The C, the E, the K, the F, the G, letter after letter, each generation refining the transverse cylinder threshing system Gleaner had built its reputation on. But if you asked the custom cutting crews and family farmers who ran these machines through the 1970s, which Gleaner they'd point to as the one that defined the brand at its peak, most of them will say the same two letters, L2.
Introduced in 1977 as an update to the Model L that had launched in 1972, the L2 carried either a 145 horsepower Allis-Chalmers 301 engine on the gear drive version or a 158 horsepower Allis-Chalmers 426 on the hydrostatic model. It could be fitted with a 24-foot grain head or an 8-row corn head, genuinely large equipment for its era, and it carried forward the push-button electro-hydraulic controls, stone ejection door, and visual tailings monitoring that had made the Model L line a favorite among custom harvesters chasing wheat north from Texas to Canada. On the used equipment lots and in the farm magazines of the day, the L2 was known for something unusual in this business. It held its resale value better than almost anything else in its class. Farmers who ran them still talk about the L2 the way people talk about a good dog. Dependable, forgiving of a hard year, the kind of machine you kept 15 years past when you probably should have traded it.
That was the era when Gleaner silver was everywhere across the wheat belt. Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, Oklahoma, glinting in combine rows at harvest time alongside the orange of the Allis-Chalmers tractors that towed the grain carts behind them. An orange and silver farm meant something specific to the neighbors who drove past it. Loyalty to one dealer, one parts network, one company's way of building a machine. There is a filing in the AGCO corporate archive that marks the exact year Independence, Missouri stopped being an Allis-Chalmers town. The date on that filing is not the one most people assume. Between 1981 and 1986, the farm crisis tore through the Midwest with a force the equipment industry had never had to plan for. Land values that had climbed through the inflationary 1970s collapsed. Interest rates that peaked near 21% turned ordinary operating debt into something farmers could no longer service. Commodity prices fell at the same time export markets shrank. Farms went under by the hundreds of thousands across the decade, and every one of those failures was a combine, a tractor, a planter that would never be replaced. Equipment manufacturers watched order books that had been full in 1979 sit empty by 1983.
Allis-Chalmers, already strained by a diversified industrial business that was struggling on multiple fronts, could not absorb the shock. In 1984, the company shut its tractor and combine plants for 3 months, unable to move inventory it had already built. The following year, 1985, Allis-Chalmers sold its entire farm equipment division, Gleaner combines included, to Kluckner Humboldt Deutz AG, a German industrial conglomerate that owned the Deutz-Fahr tractor and engine business. The new entity was called Deutz-Allis Corporation. The Independence, Missouri combine plant kept running, now under a German parent that had never sold a single machine under its own name in the American Corn Belt. Gleaner combines kept the silver galvanized body that had defined them for 60 years, but a green stripe appeared along the side, a nod to Deutz's corporate color scheme, stamped onto a machine that had built its entire identity on refusing to be anyone's paint job but its own. It did not go well for long. Deutz-Allis lost roughly $82 million in 1987 alone. KHD slashed the dealer network from around 1,800 outlets down to 800 and cut the American workforce from over 1,800 employees to roughly 900. Costs came down. The losses shrank to under $2 million by 1989, but the German parent had seen enough. In May 1990, KHD sold its North American operations to a management buyout group led by Robert J. Ratliff, alongside executives who had come up through the Gleaner side of the business. The price was roughly $89 million. The new company took a name built entirely from the two surviving brands, Allis Gleaner Corporation, AGCO. By 1991, the green stripe was gone from the Gleaner's flank, replaced by a new orange. Not quite the old Allis-Chalmers Persian orange,
but close enough that longtime dealers said it felt like watching a familiar face come home to the wrong house.
Independence, Missouri never lost its combine plant outright, and that is, in its own way, the strangest part of this story. Unlike the tractor towns that watched their factories close for good, Independence kept building Gleaner combines straight through the Deutz-Alice years and into the AGCO era. The Alice Chalmers name disappeared from the tailgate decal in 1984. The Deutz Green disappeared in 1991. But the line kept moving in the same Missouri plant that had been building Gleaners since the brothers first moved production out of Kansas in the 1920s.
The real dislocation came later, and it came for Kansas rather than Missouri. In 2000, AGCO consolidated Gleaner combine manufacturing into its Heston, Kansas facility. Engineering and production folded into one modern site, closing out the long Independence, Missouri chapter of the brand's story. The irony did not go unnoticed by anyone who knew the history. Heston sits only a few miles from Nickerson, the town where Curtis, George, and Ernest Baldwin had built their first self-propelled machine in 1923. 77 years after the Gleaner left Kansas for Missouri, it came home.
Somewhere tonight in a machine shed in central Kansas, a Gleaner L2 that has been running since the Carter administration is getting its sickle sections checked before next season. And the man doing the checking learned this machine from a father or a grandfather who bought it new off a dealer's lot. Online forums built entirely around Gleaner ownership, men and women trading serial number histories, arguing gently over which model year got the better hydraulic pump, tracking down a replacement fuel tank for a machine the factory stopped supporting parts for decades ago, keep a working memory of this brand alive in more detail than most published histories manage. Antique tractor and combine shows across the wheat belt still put unpainted Gleaners on display specifically because the galvanized silver needs no restoration to look right. It was never painted to begin with, and 60 years on, it still looks like it just rolled off the Independence line. The company that built these machines has been renamed 4 times. The knowledge of how to time a Gleaner's threshing.
The silver of a Gleaner combine was never chosen to be beautiful. It was chosen because paint was a waste of money on a machine that was going to sit outside in a Kansas dust storm anyway. And somehow, that plain, practical, unpainted honesty became one of the most loved identities in American farm equipment. The brand survived a depression, a foreign takeover, and a farm crisis that erased hundreds of thousands of farms around it. And it survived by doing the one thing its founders built it to do from the very beginning: leave nothing behind. Not the wheat in the field, not, it turns out, the name itself, however many corporate letterheads it has worn since 1923. The company changed hands 4 times. The metal never needed repainting once. That is the real story here. Not a factory, not a boardroom, but 3 brothers from a Kansas wheat farm who built something so honestly suited to the land it worked that the land itself kept it alive long after the company that made it stopped being what it once was.
If you grew up watching that dull silver glint move across a wheat field, or if your father or grandfather did, the next story in this series is one you'll want to hear.